You are most welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Real Impartation Moment on Tuesday Night Anatomy with Daniel Open. Today's meeting, we continue our meetings regarding the developmental anatomy of the various structures of the human body. My friends, we got to a time where we explained the developmental anatomy of the stomach as being part of the foregut. My friends, to talk about the duodenum, it is found, yes, partly, in the foregut area, and of course, partly in the midgut area. And that is why it will be having dual blood supply. My friends, today I'm not going to talk about the duodenum because already we need to understand some important details regarding the development of the midgut. And so, my friends, today's meeting, I quickly take you some bit of demonstration regarding the developmental anatomy of the midgut. And then from there, I also touch briefly on some developmental anomalies that may be associated with, of course, the development of the midgut. Now, first of all, I told you something that whenever we talk about the midgut, its blood supply, by way of arterial blood supply, will be coming from something we call superior mesenteric artery. Now, my friends, with the help of the superior mesenteric artery, now taking that this is of course the midgut. Okay, this whole thing, okay, my limb, okay, my both upper limbs, okay, represent what we call the midgut. And then take it that this pen, this red pen I have over here, is of course my superior mesenteric artery. Now, with the help of the superior mesenteric artery, which is in the midline, okay, in the axis, okay, separating two components of this midgut, okay, we are able to get the cranial portion of this midgut, cranial to, of course, this axis by way of the superior mesenteric artery, and of course, I also have this caudal portion of what we call the midgut. Now, please remember that this cranial portion of the midgut, okay, comes before this red pen I have over here, which represents my superior mesenteric artery. For this reason, this guy over here can also be called the pre-arterial segment of the midgut loop. And of course, the caudal limb over here becomes, because it comes after this one, after the superior mesenteric artery, becomes the post-arterial segment of the midgut. Now, first of all, this is an important thing I want you to become aware of. Know that when you talk about the midgut, it's going to dwell, of course, in, the abdominal cavity. Now, don't forget that this abdominal cavity will also contain some other larger organs, so to speak, with respect to, of course, the embryo. Okay, so now, what are the major things which are going to be so large in the abdominal cavity? First of all, we talk about the liver, and then also the left and right kidneys. They are so large. Meanwhile, this midgut, okay, the loops, okay, by way of having, of course, the cranial limb, okay, which is the pre-arterial segment, which eventually will become the small intestine. Remember, the pre-arterial segment, okay, becomes the small intestine, while of course the post-arterial segment will become that of the large intestine. Please get to appreciate these things. Now, if you can see my wrist over here, as far as my left upper limb is concerned, which represents, of course, the post-arterial segment, what you see is that I have indicated over here. Remember that the post-arterial segment is the one who is going to give rise to, of course, the large intestine. Now, because it's going to give rise to a large intestine, we will be having, a diverticulum, an outportion structure of this, post-arterial segment. Normally, if you talk about the large intestine, we're talking about the colon. But my friends, the cecum is the one over here. So the wrist, the one where is surrounding my wrist, okay, becomes my cecum, an outportion structure, which also gets a blind diverticulum, okay, structure over here, which we call it the vermiform appendix. So please get to know that whenever I talk about the post-arterial segment, I'm talking about that portion which will give rise to large intestine, including the cecum and of course the appendix. That's the first thing I want you to know. Now, during development, okay, what we see is that around the 6th week of intrauterine life, when you're in the mother's womb, what we see is that there's that kind of rapid growth of what we call the midgut loop, both the pre-arterial segment and of course the post-arterial segment. So fast that it outpaces the space which is supposed to dwell as far as being in the abdominal cavity is concerned. And so what happens? Remember that in the beginning of this series, I drew what we call the foregut, midgut, and hindgut, and I told you that connecting, okay, the yolk sac which will be down there to, of course, the midgut is going to be via something we call the vitelo-intestinal duct. And I told you that it herniated or it went through what we call, the umbilical opening. So for this reason, this umbilical opening is there. And so what we see is that this midgut, okay, because of rapid growth, okay, and we don't have a lot of space, okay, for it to be accommodated in the, abdominal cavity because of the large masses of organs like the liver and of course the kidneys, it herniates out. So I want you to know, it herniates out of the body. So that's what I want you to know. Through, of course, the umbilical opening. My friends, this is happening around the 6th week of intrauterine life. So keep, your ear regarding these important points. Now, this kind of herniation is a normal thing which happens because of that rapid growth of the, midgut loop. For this reason, we call this hernia midgut loop hernia. Midgut loop hernia. And because it's a normal thing, we call it a physiological hernia. Physiological hernia. So my friends, what I want you to know is that when we ask you that physiological hernia will happen around what week of intrauterine life, my friends, your answer is of course the 6th week of intrauterine life. Now it will remain there until the 10th week of intrauterine life, which this hernia will get reduced because by that time the abdominal cavity will have grown enough to this time around accommodate the midgut loop. So please understand these things. Now, this is where I'll be chipping in certain important points for you to understand. First of all, one thing is that there are some individuals, okay, where if this herniation takes place, it fails to return back. This hernia refuses to get reduced. Okay, so it means that this, intestinal loop, the midgut loop, okay, will be, of course, out of the abdominal cavity. And my friends, importantly, it will be covered by what we call the amniotic membrane. Okay, so you'll be seeing some kind of shiny membrane around it. And my friends, this herniation, because it took place in the umbilical area, okay, over there, this kind of hernia, which is of course, it was, the herniation took place was a physiological thing, but it failed to retain. So for this reason, this kind of hernia, we call it omphalocele. Omphalocele. So please understand it. Now, if you see omphalocele begins with O. So it begins with O, then it means that the intestinal content will be covered by some kind of membrane around it. And that's what we call the amniotic membrane. That's the first thing I want you to know. Now, normally this omphalocele may be often associated with a lot of congenital anomalies. And oftentimes, yes, the individual, because this content is exposed to the external environment, the person is going to perhaps die out of secondary bacterial infection and what have you. Okay, so please understand these things. Now that's the first thing. The next thing that we talk about is that now I told you there was this kind of physiological hernia. Now we move on with it. Physiological hernia has taken place. Then there's going to be some kind of rotation going to take place, and this kind of rotation is going to be 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation of the midgut loop. 90 degrees counterclockwise, something you can also say anti-clockwise. So now look at it. What we have currently as the herniation of the midgut took place, we have what we call the pre-arterial segment at the cranial region, and then we have the post-arterial segment at the caudal region. So what happened is that 90 degrees clockwise, okay, you the observer, look at what we are going to do. So there's 90 degrees anti-clockwise rotation of the midgut loop. 90 degrees anti-clockwise, not clockwise. Okay, 90 degrees anti-clockwise rotation of the midgut loop. Now, when this happens, what do we see? What we will see is that once there's this first 90 degrees anti-clockwise rotation, we see that the pre-arterial segment will be at my right side. We are talking about, the specimen of interest will be at the right-hand side, while of course the post-arterial segment will be on the left-hand side. So what did I tell you? I told you that the pre-arterial segment is the one which is going to support the small intestine. of course, some portion of the duodenum, the distal portion of the duodenum, together with, of course, the jejunum and, of course, the ileum will be on the, what we call the right-hand side. While, of course, the post-arterial segment will be on the left-hand side, which I told you will be giving rise to the large intestine, like the colon, including the cecum, and, of course, the appendix. Okay, so please, that's one thing I want you to become aware of. Okay, that's the first 90 degrees rotation. That will be the resultant effect. The resultant effect is that, of course, we will have our axis, okay, over here. And what's our axis? We're talking about, of course, the spermatocentric artery, okay, in between them. And then, of course, we have the pre-arterial segment towards the right side, okay, of the abdominal cavity, while the post-arterial segment will be towards what we call the left side of the abdominal cavity. That's first of all, the first thing. Now, please appreciate this. There will be two more rotations which are going to take place, both of them going to be 90 degrees anti-clockwise or counterclockwise rotations. But my friends, in case after this first rotation it takes place and no any other rotation takes place, no further rotation, it is something we call it non-rotation. Now please appreciate it. Although there has been 90 degrees rotation, we are supposed to go through additional 2 90 degrees rotations. Yes. So if the remaining 2 counterclockwise rotations, if they fail to take place, that is something we call non-rotation. Non-rotation, although the first 90-degree rotation has taken place. And so if this one happens like this, first 90 degrees rotation, and then they return, okay, the pre-arterial segment, the post-arterial segment, they return back to the abdominal cavity, then what is going to be the resultant effect? We will have what we call the pre-arterial segment, okay, by way of the small intestine towards the right side, while of course the post-arterial segment will be towards the left side of the, what we call the abdominal cavity. Okay, if you have an image-based, question like this one is drawn to you, you should be able to clearly, tell us that this is a case of non-rotation of what we call the midgut loop. That's the first thing. So already, I've mentioned 2 congenital anomalies to you. One of them was of phalocele, the non-return, failure of the non-return of the physiological hernia. Okay, now if only 90 degrees anti-clockwise rotation takes place, then that one becomes non-rotation. Because my friends, we need additional 2 90 degrees counterclockwise rotations. So now let's move on. So that's another case, okay, which I've described to you. So first of all, we are doing all these things so that you can appreciate all these things. Now, first of all, what did I say? Midgut loop was growing, okay, so fast that it could be contained in the abdominal cavity. So what happened? Because of the large liver and of course the kidneys, we needed space, so it herniated through what we call the, what we call the umbilical opening. And then from there, what did I say? After, 4 weeks, okay, from that, that's the physiological herniation, which happened around the 6th week of intrauterine life. I said around the 10th week, you should return. But before it returns, what's going to happen? We are going to have the first 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation, and that brings our pre-arterial segment towards the right side, which of course the small intestine, while the post-arterial segment, okay, the large intestine with the cecum appendix, will be towards the left side. So then what is going to happen? Now, out of the pre-arterial segment and the post-arterial segment, which one do you think, okay, will return? Now, when they are going to return to the abdominal cavity, the pre-arterial segment will return faster, followed by the post-arterial segment. The question is why? Okay, so that the point is that what I want you to appreciate is that the pre-arterial segment is so large, okay, because that's the one who is forming the course of the small intestine. You know, the small intestine, okay, on average about 6 meters. The large intestine on average just 1.5 meters. So this one will have to return and then to be followed by what we call the post-arterial segment. So that's what is going to happen. So we said first 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation, we've had it, okay, and then it will be followed. Now look at what I'm doing. Anti-clockwise rotation. Anti-clockwise rotation. Now when this anti-clockwise rotation, what happens is that the pre-arterial segment is returning to the abdominal cavity first. Now this time it shifts towards that of the left side of the abdominal cavity to create a space so that the post-arterial segment will come and of course overlap it and dwell in this area, in this manner. So that's how it's going to be. So yes, first 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation, okay, then the next 90 degrees, what I'm saying is that the pre-arterial segment is returning, okay, it returns so large, it returns back, and then to be followed, it gets to that of the left side of the abdominal cavity, creates a space on the right side so that the post-arterial segment cannot come and dwell over there. And my friends, when it dwells over there, it overlaps. Yes, I want you to appreciate that. It overlaps what we call that of the small intestine. So please understand this one for me. Okay, so this is going to be the effect. Now, what do you think is going to happen? When you have such a situation, no problem. I mean, of course, the pre-arterial segment by way of the small intestine, okay, normally is overlapped by the large intestine. Okay, and so what do we see? We see that, in fact, the cecum and the appendix is more or less in around where the midline of the body is. In such a case, okay, if it stays over here and then the next rotation does not take place, my friends, we call it mild rotation. Not non-rotation, we call it mild rotation. And this cecum, what's the location of the cecum right now? It's around the epigastric region, okay, as far as the abdominal cavity is concerned. Okay, or in the pyloric region. Sometimes you can say subpyloric area. And so this area of the cecum, after the second rotation, if no subsequent rotations take place, we call it a subpyloric cecum. So that's also an anomaly which can take place. Now, usually, if such a thing happens, okay, it may not really cause any problem. However, the cecum, okay, may be connected to the posterior abdominal wall, okay, via what we call mesentery. And my friends, the peritoneal fold, which I call it mesentery in this case, if they don't become absorbed, if they don't undergo zygosis, then what happens is that you may have a situation where, of course, the cecum may be, moving all around the abdominal cavity. Okay, and that is something which may lead to something called cecal volvulus. Cecal volvulus. Now, please understand all these points I'm trying to tell you. So, subpyloric cecum, the unabsorbed peritoneal fluids, it means that no zygosis takes place. Then what it means is that those peritoneal fluids which are present, which can also give in an eponym known as lard bands, then it may result in the cecum moving elsewhere in the abdominal cavity, and that is something which may lead to something called cecal volvulus. Please understand this one. So that's also a third anomaly, which I want you to also, appreciate that. Great. Now let's move on. Now the next thing is that we expect, yes, so it will be overlapped, but of course the small intestine, the arterial segment, or what we call the cranial limb of the midgut loop, will be overlapped by the caudal limb, which is the post-arterial segment. Okay, saying that we will be having the cecum in the subpyloric region, together with, of course, the appendix. Okay, so that's the next one. So how many 90 degrees anti-clockwise rotations have we seen? My friends, 2 90 degrees anti-clockwise rotations that we've seen. Now, of course, the cecum doesn't dwell in, of course, the subpyloric region or in the epigastric region. The cecum, if you know it, it's going to be in the right, iliac fossa. That's the location of the cecum. So it means that this cecum, which is in the midline, so to speak, should have to come all the way to, of course, this right side. And so, my friends, there is going to be another 90 degrees anti-clockwise or counterclockwise rotation. Yes, mainly this time around, the post-arterial segment. So that it brings the cecum, which was in the subpyloric cecum, this time around, into an area below the liver. So we call it what? Subhepatic cecum, below the liver. That is because we know that the liver, the bulk of the right liver, okay, mainly is towards the right side. Okay, so we guess over there to the subhepatic cecum. That is the resultant effect of the third, and my friends, the final 90 degrees anti-clockwise rotation. Okay, so please understand what I'm just trying to say. Okay, so that will be the location of this, post-arterial segment. Essentially, I'm talking about the cecum, and of course, the way before, appendix. Now, I told you that the cecum will have to be in, of course, the right iliac fossa, not just in the subpyloric area. It has to be in the right iliac fossa. Now, sometimes it may not go to the right iliac fossa, and it will still dwell in the hepatic cecum. When you have such a situation, then what is the anomaly? My friend, the anomaly doesn't have to do with rotation, but my friend, this time around, it has to do with the failure of the differential growth of what we call the posterior abdominal wall. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that this cecum okay, will be attached to the posterior abdominal wall. So as the posterior abdominal wall lengthens, it undergoes elongation, that differential growth, it grows downwards with it. And eventually it gets to what we call the right iliac fossa. So please understand these things. Now, there's another thing which I have to bring it in. There's actually a fourth major case, apart from, yes, the cecum getting stuck, of course, the right, the subhepatic space and not getting to the right iliac fossa. There's another important case which I want you to know. Okay, already so far, we've seen what we call non-rotation, we've seen omphalocele, okay, we've seen, malrotation, where it can lead to cecal volvulus. We have explained that one. The fourth important case, which I want you to become aware, is something called reverse rotation. Reverse. Now, what do we mean by reverse rotation? Normally, we want the rotations to go 90 degrees anti-clockwise. Now, if any of the rotations, instead of going anti-clockwise, goes clockwise, then it becomes a reverse rotation. And my friend, this reverse rotation, let's look at what happens. Now, what did I say? I said that normally, after this physiological herniation, okay, there's going to be that first 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation. Now, instead of going anti-clockwise, and then this small intestine gets shifted toward the right side, okay, sorry, the left side, giving space, okay, so that we get overlapped by, of course, the large intestine. My friend, it doesn't happen like this. After this first 90 degrees counterclockwise rotation, it will be followed by, of course, this time we talk about 180 degrees clockwise rotation. 180 degrees clockwise rotation. And my friend, whenever there's this 180 degrees clockwise rotation, what we'll be seeing is that this time around, the post-arterial segment will return, okay, before that of the pre-arterial segment. The post-arterial segment will return to the abdominal cavity before the pre-arterial segment. Interestingly, that's what's going to happen. When that happens, it means that the large intestine will be overlapped by, of course, the small intestine. Precisely, the transverse colon will be overlapped by the duodenum. When you have such a case, we call it reverse rotation. Reverse rotation. Now, it is not only, my friends, the duodenum which will be overlapping the transverse colon, but my friends, also the one which was forming the axis, the superior mesenteric artery, will also be overlapping this transverse colon. And my friends, oftentimes in situations of reverse rotation, they are associated with intestinal obstruction. Intestinal obstruction. Yes. And the major culprit which is leading or which is causing this intestinal obstruction, my friends, okay, the obstruction of the transverse colon, is not mainly by, of course, the duodenum, but my friends, is by the superior mesenteric artery. And I want you to know these things. These are important facts which you need to keep in mind. So we've seen that one. My friends, something else also happens, which I want you to know. And my friends, next week, I'll show you all these images. I'll have to draw them or show them using PowerPoint for you to appreciate these concepts clearly. Now, the next guy, which I'm talking about, an important anomaly, which oftentimes is confused with omphalocele. The first anomaly I explained, my friend, this time around, we call it gastroschisis. Gastroschisis. Now, this time around, what we see is that we saw that in situations where the umbilical opening, yes, is over there, the physiological herniation took place, bringing the intestine and midgut loop outside. And that's a physiological thing. But failure to retain, okay, so that the intestinal content will be covered by this amniotic membrane, that is something we call the omphalocele. O is covered. O is covered. This time around, we call it gastroschisis. Now, my friends, in the case of gastroschisis, the point I want you to become aware is that this time around, already the umbilical opening after reduction of the physiological hernia will get closed. So there will not be any space, okay, for the intestinal content to herniate out of the umbilical opening again. Yes, first of all, understand that. This time around, due to failure of complete lateral folding of the embryo, there will be some kind of defect as far as closure of the lateral abdominal wall, okay, will be concerned. And my friends, this time Okay, after the reduction, there could be that kind of reherniation. This time not through the umbilical opening, but through a defect in the lateral or anterolateral abdominal wall. And my friends, this time around, it will not come out with, the amniotic membrane. This time around, it will not be covered by amniotic membrane. So remember, gastroschisis is G. Now, if you look at G, there's an opening over there, so it means the intestinal content is coming out, and they are not covered, okay, by what we call the amniotic membrane. You can have an image-based, question like this, where of course you may have two cases. One of them you can see the amniotic membrane. Okay, one of them you don't see it, but if you can see it, then you know that we are talking about omphalocele. If you don't see it, then it means the defects, okay, happening during the lateral fold of the embryo, okay, so that there wasn't complete closure of the anterolateral abdominal wall. There was that weakness, and then the intestinal content herniated out. Please understand these things. Well, I've seen situations where, of course, you can have an image-based question where, of course, the colon especially may be so large. Now, I'll be showing you all these images. I'll explain them into detail the next meeting that we talk about. Okay, something we call congenital megacolon. So the colon becomes so large. It's also a congenital, normally, congenital megacolon is so large. Something where it's also given an eponym, okay, Hirschsprung disease. So if you hear of Hirschsprung disease, then we are talking about congenital megacolon. Ladies and gentlemen, all in all, I want you to understand this completely, okay? And then once you're able to do that, okay, I'll show you all these pictures, and of course, you understand them better. I'm very grateful for your time this evening. Have a good night, all of you, and may the good Lord richly bless you. Amen.